Well, the other developing story this afternoon, the Labour Appeal Court dismissing a bid by public sector unions to force government to pay the public servants' salary increase that was based on that agreement back in 2018. The court found that the enforcement order clause on the 2018 wage agreement was unlawful. During those proceedings, Treasury had submitted that it did not approve the hike as required by law. The ruling follows months of back and forth with unions demanding the increase be implemented on the basis of that agreement, despite government arguing that it did not have the money to pay for the increase. Mugwena Maluleke is the General Secretary of the Teachers Union SADTU, but he is also the Chief Negotiator for the public sector unions within the SADTU Federation. Mugwena, good afternoon to you. I'm afraid I must admit when we last spoke here on Newsfeed, I suggested you were unlikely to lose, and yet, I think for many people, this will have come as a bit of a shock. You've actually lost this case.
Good afternoon, Stephen. Thank you for having us. Indeed, look, it came as a shock because as we note this particular judgment, our preliminary view, Stephen, is that it has profound implications on one of the fundamental elements of collective bargaining agreements. And for that reason, we have asked our legal team to study this particular judgment, and by next week, we shall be able to make a decision on the course of action on whether we approach the Constitutional Court on appeal or we take any other course of action, given the fact that we believe that we need to defend collective bargaining in our country.
Well, I was going to say, who do you appeal to? Because you and government agreed, if I remember correctly, to go to the Labour Appeal Court directly rather than the Labour Court and go through a longer process. Either way, this is going to be a much longer process than you thought it would be. A Constitutional Court application could take quite some time.
Well, that's why we are studying this judgment, and our lawyers are working hard to ensure that we are able to understand each and every element of this particular judgment. What does it mean? What are the implications for collective bargaining in the future, but also on this particular collective agreement and so forth, when it cannot be enforced? Yeah.
Mugwena, I don't know if you're able to shed any light on this, but it does seem there were particular intricacies within the processes that were being followed by government at the time. You would have heard in my introduction I suggested that Treasury hadn't signed off on the increase. Now, there's been some speculation about the role of some of the people who were in office at the time. I think Faith Mutambi, if I remember correctly, was the Minister of Public Service and Administration. You might have been negotiating with her. Do you know? You know our politics. Did something go wrong in government?
Well, that would not be an issue of the collective bargaining chamber, because we sit in the collective bargaining chamber. We go for mandate seeking to our members. We know how we deal with our own procedures and structures out there, and government knows what they do. And when they make an offer, you cannot ask them on whether this offer has been approved by cabinet or the National Treasury. You cannot do that. You are not going to be able to have that particular information. The only thing that you have is that you are negotiating in good faith with an employer that puts a collective agreement on the table. So we don't believe that Mutambi did not have a mandate, because after Mutambi, then Maluleke came in. It was the same offer. It never changed. And then we signed that particular offer after we have compromised from our own demands. So clearly it is that it makes collective bargaining very complicated. If we have to ask every time they put an offer, we put a demand, and then we must ask them, did Treasury sign it off? Did the cabinet say? We can't do that. We negotiate on the basis of good faith. And then, and that is the fundamental principle of negotiation, is to negotiate in good faith. Otherwise, if you don't, you are creating unnecessary unrest in labor.
There's so many different issues that come out of this, and you've immediately spoken about how you see this as an attack on collective bargaining. I do understand the logic of your argument. I do understand why that's important, and the point that you make about what this means for the future. But in essence, government has argued, I think in court and in the court of public opinion, that it simply cannot afford to pay the increase. And you will know, you and I have discussed this here before, that government is actually in a worse financial position than it was in February when it first told you it couldn't pay the increase. Now you've lost this case. Is this maybe, Mugwena, a moment to sit back, reflect, perhaps negotiate with government, some way to save collective bargaining without you having to make the claim in public on shows like this one that your members deserve an above-inflation increase when everybody else has lost income this year?
Well, as I'm saying, Stephen, is that we will then be, we have never closed the door for negotiations or for any engagement. We have always, as you remember, I said last time, we have since written a letter to the president to say we want to meet the president, understand what is happening in the country, and so that he can also have an understanding from where we come from and see how best we are able to deal with these issues. However, when it comes to this particular judgment, I would leave it to the legal counsel to advise on that, and therefore we are going to be tabling our demands for the future, and therefore we'll take it from there, because we cannot wait until this particular dispute has been resolved, because as you are saying, yes, if it happens that next week we take a decision to go to the Constitutional Court, it's going to be a prolonged and tedious process. We understand that, but in defense of collective bargaining, which is a very fundamental trade union right, we are willing to go to whatever it takes to ensure that we protect that. But at the same time, we can't wait before we table our demand for 2021, because clearly that our members would want to see their wages being improved as they are in the front line of fighting against this particular pandemic.
Mugwena Maluleke, I do appreciate the time. Thank you. The General Secretary of the South African Democratic Teachers Union, speaking here as the Chief Negotiator for the public sector unions within SADTU.